Hi there, Rebecca Koffler here with Censored But Not Silenced. I'm going to give you a very quick intelligence brief on the latest developments regarding President Donald J. Trump's peace plan for Russia-Ukraine war. We've had another significant or perhaps insignificant development, regardless, depending on how you look at this matter. But the White House has just today, Tuesday, announced that after all, there are no plans for President Trump to meet with Russian President Vladimir Putin in the immediate future, which is another 180-degree shift from what President Trump just said 2 days ago. On Friday, President Trump met with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskiy after he held a 2.5-hour phone call with the Russian President Vladimir Putin. On Friday, President Trump was very optimistic regarding the peace plan to settle the Russia-Ukraine conflict. He was speaking with Zelenskiy about the possibility of the Tomahawk missiles to be provided to Ukraine so that Ukraine can strike deep inside Russia in order to pressure the Russian military and the Russian leadership to abandon the so-called special military operation, which is basically a full front assault on Ukraine. Anyway, this seems to be a pattern of the White House changing the policy pretty much daily. So what I would like to explain in this brief is why the peace plan for Ukraine proposed by President Trump is unachievable. And I've stated that multiple times on my podcast. So I'd like to, again, summarize it, remind why it's unachievable. But most importantly, I would like to make my intelligence assessment of why the White House's policy on Russia, Ukraine has been failing, and it will continue to fail until they start doing their homework. So first, to reiterate, the peace plan is unachievable because neither side wants to end this war on terms that are acceptable to both of them. By neither side, I mean Russia and Ukraine, President Putin and President Zelensky. The crux of the matter is that Putin holds nearly all the cards. Zelensky holds nearly 0 cards. Therefore, Russia does not have to settle. It's an existential issue for Russia, this conflict, because Ukraine is part of Russia's strategic security perimeter on which it relied for centuries on its security. And Putin, having tried for several years to compel Ukraine to abandon its plans for joining NATO, and having tried to convince the alliance, NATO, and the United States, which is the key member of the alliance, to abandon the plans to accept Ukraine into NATO and to remove the warfighting capability that is deployed in Ukraine within Russia's strategic security perimeter. And having failed at that, compelling Ukraine and convincing the United States and NATO. Putin launched the so-called special operation in February 2022. So it's nearly 4 years, and this war is not going anywhere, and it's not gonna go. The peace plan, again, Putin does not want peace because he wants to eliminate that military capability in Ukraine, just like the United States would not allow Russia, China, Iran, or any of the adversary to station combat capabilities in, let's say, Canada or Mexico, and would have destroyed it if they did. Significant military capability. So that's what Putin is doing. He doesn't have to settle. Zelensky believes that he has leverage because the Europeans are pushing him to continue this war, because as long as Ukraine continues to fight, Russia, the Europeans assess, does not have the capacity to attack a NATO country. That is the assessment, because Russia is stretched thin and therefore it would not attack a NATO country. Well, Putin has no plans to attack a NATO country because he is not suicidal. He wants to avoid a direct confrontation with NATO because of NATO's technological superiority, which would compel Putin to use nuclear weapons, specifically tactical nuclear warheads, and operationalize its escalate to de-escalate strategy. And at that point, no one really knows where this conflict would go. An assessment has been made both by the U.S. intelligence community and obviously the Russian military, the Russian general staff, on where it could lead. And where it could lead is basically over here described in my book. It would lead to a direct war between Russia and the United States, the world's most formidable nuclear powers. And it can get pretty ugly, and Russia, in fact, does have plans on the book to defeat the United States, including militarily, in such a war. That plan is very nuanced, is very sophisticated. It doesn't mean that Russia is going to destroy the United States, attack the United States, but there's a multi-step plan and multi-pronged strategy that I described at the unclassified level in this book. So Russia feels confident. Putin feels confident because the plan was prepared on his watch and on his orders, that the plan that either the United States will be intimidated into not engaging in this war by becoming a direct combatant to the Russia-Ukraine conflict, or if we were to deploy forces into the theater, Russia can win such a war, because that war is not going to be fought exclusively on the battlefield. It will be fought in U.S. homeland and in Russian homeland. And for a variety of reasons that I addressed in other podcasts, the Russians feel that they can prevail or deter. And one of the reasons is Russia's higher threshold for pain tolerance, various types of pain, whether it's cyber attacks on the electrical grid, whether it's attack of our satellites that could, if not cripple, significantly disrupt our way of life, even our civilian way of life, because we are extremely reliant on satellites for a number of applications and industries, whether it's financial industry, technology, our entire military's ability to prosecute war is reliant on satellites. So that is why Putin does not have to settle. Zelensky somehow holds a tremendous leverage over the White House. I personally do not understand why. I don't understand why President Trump does not simply tell Zelensky to settle, because we, the United States, have been providing the lion's share of both finances, cash, and military hardware for Ukraine, because Ukraine just simply could not have fought on its own. It doesn't have intelligence capabilities, and because it does not own its own satellite network, it doesn't have the money. It's we're basically supplying half of Ukraine's GDP. And yet somehow Zelensky is able to call the shots, even with President Trump. That bit I do not understand, whether there's influence from people like Lindsey Graham and Richard Blumenthal, who keeps singing in President Trump's ear that Ukraine can possibly win the war, which is absurd. It is absurd because during the Biden administration, we have funneled so much military hardware, missiles, air defenses, obviously, intelligence, all kinds of command and control components. We have given them so much that we've depleted our own weapons arsenal to very dangerous levels, and still Ukraine did not prevail on the battlefield. So how is it that all of a sudden there's a belief that somehow at the end of fourth year Ukraine could prevail? It is absurd. But nevertheless, Zelensky keeps manipulating even the White House. And the second point that I would like to address, and that is why the White House's Russia-Ukraine policy keeps failing, because they're all over the place. Today it's, Ukraine can win back territory, which is, again, another absurd statement. Tomorrow is, no, you cannot. Today I'm going to give them tomahawks. Tomorrow I'm not going to give them tomahawks. Them meaning Ukraine. And one can argue that it is a deliberate strategy by President Trump to keep the adversary off balance. But the truth is, it would only work if we had the leverage. We don't have the leverage. We don't have the leverage, or we don't have the cards, as President Trump likes to say. And that is because the U.S. intelligence and national security apparatus has been sleeping at the wheel for 2 decades while Russia was developing this plan that I described over here. Here, my book is available anywhere, including on Amazon. And so we did not bother to develop a counter strategy. So all that's taking place right now is a result of that inability to contain Putin. So we failed at deterring Putin, because he did invade Ukraine, because we didn't have a viable deterrence strategy. And now we are failing, compelling him to end the war, because we do not have leverage points. And I described how and why we don't have them. Tomahawks, is the recent thing. We simply do not have enough of them to make a difference on the battlefield. We need them ourselves, frankly, because yeah, we have war plans to have on the books. We have major adversary like China that is preparing to secure control over Taiwan, including kinetically, around 2027. So we need those things ourselves. We need 155 millimeter shells, artillery shells that we are dangerously low on. We need Patriot missiles ourselves. Right, so sanctions, I explained before why sanctions are not going to work, because the bilateral trade between Russia and the United States is minuscule, so there's nothing to sanction. And we've been sanctioning Russia for 10 years, 11 years, since 2014, since the invasion of Crimea, and that has not changed Putin's decision calculus. Why does anyone, including Lindsey Graham, think that after 11 years somehow it's going to make a difference and it's going to make Putin to, close shop and say, oops, okay, you won. I'm going to get out here and abandon part of the strategic buffer zone, his version, Russia's version of the Monroe Doctrine. So it's preposterous to think that. Secondary sanctions envision that we would sanction China, India, and some of the European countries who continue to import oil from Russia. Two problems with that hypothesis. A is that China and India are not going to play ball. Hungary is not going to play ball because they have their own national interests, and they're not simply going to, jump when we say jump, just because, we want them to stop. They have their own economic interest and security interest. And even if they were, let's say, well, heck with that, we're not going to buy any more oil from Russia. We're going to buy it from the United States. Still, Russia's economy is not 100% reliant on oil. Yes, it will hurt the Russian economy, but it will not hurt it to the point where Putin will end the war. Okay, the Russians fought multiple wars. Their economy has never, ever been strong, ever in its history. Okay, and yet they've been able to fight and wanted to fight those wars. Why is that? It's because security interests and economic interests are two different things in the Russian mindset and in Putin's decision calculus. Security always trumps, pun intended, economic concerns. And even if you look at our own history, the US history, we have been engaged in foreign wars for a quarter of a century, right? Kosovo, Iraq, Afghanistan, Libya, Syria. We spent trillions on these wars. We fought them through multiple financial crises. We didn't, and those were foreign wars. We didn't have, vital interests to protect in those wars. We kept fighting them, even though we were running out of money. We ran into debt, right? So who is it on President Trump's team who was able to convince him that, somehow if Russia were in a difficult financial situation, it would end the war that it believes it fights for its vital interests? It's illogical. It makes no sense. So we didn't do it. We didn't end the wars, even though we spent trillions. Wars that had no vital interest to defend, because those areas were not within our strategic security perimeter, and somehow Russia would nonsense, right? So, and so what we're left here is uh, Team Trump, whoever's advising the president, um, uh, on Russia, apparently lacks the understanding of how the Russians think, how Putin makes his decisions, what is driving the Russians, what this war is all about. And so they do what we call in the intelligence business mirror imaging. They come up with these things that somehow they think it's gonna work. They've tried everything, nothing has worked so far, and they're going to continue, fumbling like that and wasting precious resources, precious money. And unfortunately, also President Trump is not really doesn't seem like he's challenging them on those hypotheses and assessments. And the reason for that is President Trump is deeply committed to positive thinking attitude, right? That comes from him being indoctrinated by the ideology of Pastor Norman Vincent Peale. His parents, Trump's parents, were attending the church where Pastor Peale was preaching, and normally it's an excellent attitude, positive thinking. And in fact, I do have Norman Vincent Peale's book. It's sold more than 5 million copies and has been translated in multiple dozens of languages. I'll show you right here. And normally it's a really good attitude to have, but it does not replace the requirement to know your adversary. Positive thinking alone is not a strategy to compel your adversary, Russia and Vladimir Putin, to end the fight that has an existential consequences for them. Doesn't really matter how much you want this to happen, how much you want to save lives, Russians and Ukrainians, 2 million dead at this point, but you can't just wish that away with the power of positive thinking. And so, and Putin is unlike anyone that President Trump has dealt before previously. Okay, and that is another thing that his advisors appear not to understand. Vladimir Putin is a highly intelligent person, a strategic thinker, and a total gangster. He's a former KGB operative. And so you're not going to convince him with all those touchy-feely things and Ukrainian children. And yes, Melania Trump succeeded getting some Ukrainian children out, but it's not because Putin is a nice person. It's because he is manipulating both Melania and President Trump in continuing the dialogue with him while he's destroying Ukraine. It's a tactic. So Putin keeps throwing us a bone, once in a while to President Trump, to string him along. He met in Alaska, and then nothing happened, right? Then he released those children. He talks all the good talk, but then nothing really happens because he does not have to settle. Very simple. And unfortunately, there has been such an unrealistic portrayal of this war in Western media. It's a very simple portrayal. It's a Hollywood-style portrayal. Ukraine good, Russia bad, Zelenskiy good, Putin bad, Ukraine can win. And so all so-called experts, the General Keens and the Rebecca Grants and all these General Kellogg's of Washington keep lying to the American people. Are they lying or do they truly believe? Well, if they truly believe what they say that Ukraine can win, then they are completely incompetent, right? And I'm not surprised because it's the same generals, who got us into all these other foreign wars, that right? That we stayed for years, for decades, not just for years, for decades, and spent trillions of dollars, right? And we were not able to win. So it's the same people. So they're either incompetent or they are liars or both. And somehow they've been able to convince President Trump. So that's the deal. My intelligence assessment remains the Russia Ukraine peace plan is unachievable at this time because Russian President Putin holds nearly all the cards. Ukraine, NATO, and the United States, we are holding almost no cards, and so there's no willingness to compromise on either side. The war is going to continue, and it's a tragedy. But unfortunately, there's some powerful forces that are pushing for this war to continue on both sides of the Atlantic. Both sides of the Atlantic, right? There's enormous financial profits that are being made as a result of this war. And so those forces have been able to even convince President Trump to continue supporting Ukraine and thus prolonging this conflict. This was Rebecca Koffler with Censored But Not Silenced. If you like my intelligence briefings, please subscribe to my X account at Rebecca0132. I'm also on the rest of the social media platforms.